Welcome to our therapeutic yoga practice. And for today's props, let's start with a bolster. If you don't have a bolster, I'll show you how to fold some blankets to make up for that. And then grab a regular yoga strap or just a regular belt, like a clothing belt, and a couple of blocks. So it's easy with the blankets. Mexican blankets is what we use for yoga blankets. And if you don't have those, just grab yourself some thick beach or bath towels. And where you start is having the shape of the blanket fold be about 1/3 or 1/4 of the size of your mat, roughly. And depending on if you're not using a yoga blanket like this, depending on the thickness of the other blanket or towel that you're using, you might even be able to do like 3 or 4. So all you do is you fold that blanket shape in half, and you do that to another blanket. Want to make sure all the edges are always straightened out and neat. That way it feels symmetrical and lined up when you put your body on it. And when you put your second blanket on top, make sure that the edges of the blankets are in a crisscross pattern. As you can see from the side, the single edge fold of this blanket is on the opposite end of where the single fold edge is of this blanket. So you place them kind of head to toe or cross pattern like that, so one side isn't higher than the other. So this gives you a pretty decent amount of height, as you can tell. It's, maybe another 1 or 2 blankets would be compatible with the thickness of the bolster. But either way, how we're going to set this up is we're going to be in a supine twist. And I want to just show you what this looks like. Well, yeah, I'll show it from the side, meaning from the front view first. So I'm going to lay down. And I'm going to keep the bolster or blankets right next to my legs. I'm going to bend my knees. And I'm just going to drop the legs right over to the blanket. Now, depending on how intense this twist is, because we don't want it to be too intense, if you pull the blankets in closer, that means your thigh, the higher aspect of your thigh, will come to be supported by even quicker. That'll give you a less deep twist. And if you can tolerate a deeper twist, bring it further away, so then your knees have to be supported on the bolster. Okay, so you're going to do that with the blankets or the bolster, and have one blanket or towel ready so you can put your head on it. And I always like a little bit of a pillow set up like that, because I'll find that if you lay down for extended periods of time on a standard yoga mat, this can start to kind of occlude some of the circulation on the back of the head. So keep a block close by as well. I'm going to lay down. So when you start with your knees bent, make sure your feet are flat and the feet aren't too close to the hips. They're definitely not too far. So generally where you're comfortable, and here's the perfect way to test this out. So you have your feet flat on the floor, you have your chest, you have your back on the floor. Take your hand, just one single hand, left or right. I'm going to use my left, with the palm facing down. You're going to slide that right underneath your lower back. And by the lower back, I'm not talking about the glutes. So it's just above your glutes and pelvis and just below your rib cage. Now, the idea is to make sure that you have your lumbar spine, your lumbar curve, lordotic curve, in the lower back. And if you can slide your hand in, there should be a little bit of a bridge. So your hand should be able to freely slide through. Now, if that part of your lower back is kind of smushed down, you can again adjust your feet and notice where your feet and how your legs should be placed so that you can get that natural lower back curve. Because you don't want to have to curve it. And we start with it, even though we're going to twist, we start with this very complete and cohesive base. Now, you take your bolster or your blankets to the left side of you, okay? And before we twist, here's what I want you to do. Keeping your feet where they are, you're going to lift your pelvis up and move it to the right, yes, to the right, about 5 or 6 inches. And we do that so that when we actually twist, our spine comes back to being aligned. So you kind of take the spine out of alignment for the setup, but then once you set the pose up, the spine comes back to alignment, because when we're twisting from the pelvis, we're actually still rolling on the ground. And we don't want to be able to twist and roll our pelvis to deviate away from the straight position of the spine. Hopefully that makes sense. So you offset your pelvis to the right 5 or 6 inches, and then depending on the depth of your twist, you're going to drop your legs over to the bolster. And your first time landing in it, you can put your hands on your ribs, relax your feet, relax your legs, and just notice the intensity of this twist such that I can tolerate it for a couple of minutes. Right? So if the answer is yes, you can take the twist a little bit deeper, but it's not necessary. It still might be fruitful, but it's not that important. We don't want the twist to be shallow either. We don't want it to be so minimal that it doesn't really challenge the body and reorganize our alignment. So if I bring the bolster further away, where more my knees are laying on it, this is going to be a deeper twist. And I would encourage you guys to keep your knees in line with the pelvis, which is to say to keep your thigh to torso angle about 90 degrees. All right? And then you relax your legs. Obviously, your top leg is going to be sliding down, back, with respect to the bottom leg, and that's perfectly okay. But you want your shoulder blades to be flat. And you want your shoulder blades to actually be comfortably flat. And then close your eyes if you've set yourself up successfully. And as we always do for these therapeutic practices, the initial project is to see how much we can relax, how much we can, as it said, let go, surrender. Upon closing the eyes, you start to relax your forehead. The forehead muscle is a part of the visual system also, and relaxing it helps pacify the visual system. Almost any yoga class you will ever participate in, irrelevant of the method and style, the tradition always starts us off with eyes closed, which carries an important lesson. And it's important for human beings because we are really dependent so much on our visual system for survival. And for example, most other animals are dependent on their experience of hearing or smelling, and that's how they navigate the environment. For human beings, we've evolved this very complex visual system. In fact, one of the most acute visual systems in the entire animal world of all organisms, other than predatory birds. And this, of course, is advantageous as a tool for survival, but it's not so advantageous when we have to become a little more mindful with practices like yoga. The reason that's so is because of the weight of this importance of the visual system in human beings, this has recruited, and they estimate something like between 40 to 70% of your entire brain's real estate is devoted to just visual processing. And when we hear that, what we should also hear along with it is that 40 to 70% of all of the energy that the brain uses, it uses for the processing of vision. And now, if our goal is to become more aware of the body, aware of the breath, more interiorized in our experience. We can't successfully do that if 70% of our energy is being devoted to processing visual input. So we close the eyes, which is like saving gas. We save fuel. And instead of assimilating visual data, we use all those resources to begin to assimilate all the other data in the body. And oftentimes that can be very relaxing. And so now just feel how much or how little your abdomen moves when you breathe. And don't try to breathe deep with that, just notice simply. Can you notice the beating of your own heart? Can you notice your pulse without touching your body with your hands? Can you notice the feeling in your abdomen, in the so called gut, where we feel so many of our emotions? And then let's get a little bit more concrete. Feel into your back, feel into how your posterior torso is interfacing with the ground. Now, if you can tell that there's a little bit more pressure being exerted on the left side of the torso than on the right, you can always adjust that just by lifting your left shoulder blade and left ribs up a little bit, planting down the right first, and then relaxing so that the left comes down after. But that alone, just walking through those sensations of feeling of your digestive system, your pulse and heartbeat, and the skin on the back of your torso, all of those are inherently more calming. And they are so because it's interoceptive, because we're actively directing our focus towards information underneath the skin, which is what human beings reflexively do when we don't feel stressed, we don't feel in danger, we feel more or less satisfied with life. And that rest and digest state really is characterized by not processing information from the outside world, but really processing information from our own personal inner world. Okay, see if you can keep your eyes closed. Slowly pull your knees back one at a time. Try not to just lift both together. So you set your right foot down, lift the knee, and you set your left foot down, lift the left knee, and then try to just sense where your pelvis is with your eyes closed when you center it back with the torso. And let's see if you can do the rest without opening the eyes. Take your bolster or blankets, place them off to the right, and then before you twist, lift your pelvis, offset it to the left, again, about 5 or 6 inches. Okay, and then slowly drop one knee at a time over to the bolster that's on the right. And just like you did before, you can play around with the position of the bolster closer to the knees to get into a deeper twist, closer to the hips for less depth, but then still keeping the hands on the ribs or on your abdomen or like the boundary in between the lower ribs. As soon as you place your legs in that position, disconnect from all sense of duty. Disconnect from keeping tabs on your muscles or keeping tabs on your breath, and just allow your body's own inherent intelligence to begin to construct what this pose is demanding, to allow your body to really just meet the demands of this pose. And even though, of course, this pose is not demanding in the way that we know many poses in yoga are, just because it's a different posture than the majority of the postures we're accustomed to in daily life, by virtue of that, it's demanding. It's exerting a different force on the body than what the body's used to. Relax your jaw. Reappraise the very condition of your forehead. And what we can oftentimes find is if the eyeballs are busy, which is an indicator of having a busy mind, if the eyeballs are busy, it'll make the forehead muscle, that frontalis muscle, a little bit more rigid, contracted, not relaxed. Leave the gate completely open on your breath. And we'll have plenty of time through the rest of the practice to breathe a little bit more dynamically. But really, again, the beginning is just about taking our hands off of these voluntary movements, control systems, the control panel. Feel again into your digestive tract, your stomach. And does that sensation feel as accessible in this twist as it was in the other? And same thing, try to feel your own pulse from inside the body, your own heartbeat. And is that more or less vivid with this side twist than before? Similarly, feel across the posterior torso. Notice how your skin at different aspects of the torso is in contact with the floor more or less. Now, is the right side of the ribs more heavy set on the ground than the left side? And if so, do what you did before. Kind of press down with the elbows, lift your ribs up, lift the right ribs off the floor a little bit higher, and then plant the left ribs and shoulder down first, and then let the right come down after that. I've spoken before about how the action of twisting is really centered on the function of the thoracic spine. And due to the geometry of the thoracic spine, that's the part of the spine that allows for most of the twisting capability that a human spine has. And due to the fact that the ribs are connected to the thoracic spine, and due to the fact that the ribs have to move, they have to be able to be flexible in the way that they expand, the way that the rib cage contracts, to permit better and deeper breathing. What we have is all these different relationships. In a way, that's saying we have all these different dependencies. And so our respiratory volume depends on the flexibility of the rib cage. And because the rib cage is connected to the thoracic spine, the function of the rib cage is enhanced by the better functioning of your thoracic spine. And that's why twisting is so well linked to breathing better. Good. Keeping the eyes closed. Slowly start to lift your legs back up. Good. And then recenter the pelvis so everything's back on track and lined up. And then grab your belt. Unroll the belt so that it has a nice big loop. As we've done this before, we'll go through it quickly, not too quickly, of course. Open it up so you have one big loop made of it. And then we'll do all three parts of the Supta Padangusthasana series, each side at a time. So you're going to get the belt around the center of your heel. You're going to extend your right leg up. If you stick your hands inside of each side of this loop, it will give you a good handle to hold on to. And so what we want is the right leg just to be straight. And even if straight means a couple of feet off the ground or even a couple of inches off the ground, what's the most important is that the knee stays functionally straight. So you kick out through the heel, pull the toes back, but then begin to feel what the demands are of your quadriceps muscles on the right side. And so if you close your eyes, you can start to tune in the felt experience of active quadriceps. And then as you start to promote even more engagement of those muscles, more contraction, more shortening, what you're doing simultaneously is you're reflexively allowing your hamstring muscles to be inhibited, which is to say lengthened. And so this word inhibited is a neurological term, and we're talking about muscle stretching, because it's the opposite of excited. It's the opposite of active. And the only time you can really stretch muscles is when muscles are able to become inhibited, which is synonymous with relax, which is synonymous with not exert any force. And by contracting the opposite muscle groups, which in this case are the the quadriceps, by contracting the quadriceps, to that degree that we contract them to, we're also lengthening the hamstring muscles through that avenue of inhibition, which is actually called reciprocal inhibition. And that's the whole science of agonist-antagonist muscle groups. So right from this position, you're going to keep your leg just as straight, pass both sides of the strap to your left hand, and then slowly pull your right foot to the left until you can feel your left foot is directly above the left hip, left ribs, or left shoulder. But make sure you don't pull your leg past that left border of your body. And then when you're set your leg in that position, start to pull down on the belt a little bit more, not so much as if you're pulling your knee towards the head, but more so that you're just plugging your leg right back into the floor. And depending on how much effort you exert with your left arm, you'll actually feel how the back of your right glute is pressed into the ground a little bit more. And that's what we want. We want equal weight distribution, equal weight pressure across both glutes. Keep kicking out through the heel, keep pulling the toes back. And depending on which part of the back of the leg is more restricted when you straighten your knee like this, you will feel the intensity there. So for some people, they straighten the knee and they'll feel more on the hamstring. Other people will feel more in the calves. And what you can derive, the information you can derive from that or the lesson is that whichever part of the leg feels most of the stretch, if you put the whole chain on a stretch, on length, is where you are most restricted. And so for many people that feel they have a hamstring restriction, most of that is actually situated in the calves for very good reason. Come back to center, switch the belts to the right hand, both sides on the right hand, and you're going to externally rotate your right leg to the right so your knee and toes point off to the side. And once you can get no more rotation by doing that, then you're going to slowly lower your leg towards the floor, not necessarily to bring it down, but stop as soon as you notice the opposite glute, the left glute and hip lift off the mat, even slightly. And as soon as you do, you can prop your elbow up against the ground, or if your elbow is a little bit far from the ground, you can put a bolster underneath the elbow so then you can prop your arm up on it. And then all you'll have to use there is just your bicep muscle to pull the leg in, right? So remember what we did in the previous second part. We were pulling down on the belt so that we can feel more contact, more connection of the leg, the femur bone, in the hip socket. And so if you pull in on this side the right amount with your right arm, you'll actually feel the weight that was uplifted from your left glute press back down. And that's the idea again, is to retain that symmetrical weight distribution across the back of the pelvis. So what this means in the big picture sense is we're isolating these specific movements. We're dissecting the body in its functional movement programs. What that does for us is it allows us to isolate specific muscles or specific muscle groups or specific kinetic chains and see where there are different functional impediments that are preventing the whole musculoskeletal system to work as it should, which means essentially in harmony. Inhale, bring your leg back to center. And now just pass the belt from your right foot to your left foot. And by the foot, of course, I mean the heel. You're going to hold both sides of the strap in your left hand. And then straighten your left leg, even if it's not vertical. Pull the toes back, kick out through the heel. But at the same time, kick down with your right leg. And as you keep the legs super solid and straight, close the eyes. And now the interesting question that we should ask ourselves is, when I engage my left quadriceps, how does that feel compared to the previous side? And first of all, can I feel it as sensitively? Does it feel as vivid as the previous side? Or maybe it feels more vivid. Is it as difficult? And of course, is the left hamstring or calf more flexible or less flexible on this side? And depending on the answers that you get back from your body, we want to be able to keep somewhat of a tally. We want to keep a record of what are the differences between the left and right sides of our whole physical composition. And if we can start to notice what the functional asymmetries are between the sides, we then have a more clear path of how to bring about balance. So if the left hamstrings are more tight than the right hamstrings, then what that tells us inevitably is to spend more time and devote more attention to making the left hamstring as flexible as the right. And once that flexibility is balanced across the sides, then everything that depends on the hamstrings is also balanced. And what depends on the hamstrings? All the stuff above the hamstrings, literally all of it. Pass both sides of the strap to your right hand. Tilt your left leg to the right until your foot, and be very careful about this, until the foot is in line with the right side of the body. So if you were laying up against the wall with the right side, you would not be able to let your foot fall through the wall. So stop there. And again, like I said before, the foot can be above the right shoulder. It doesn't have to be above the right hip. Nonetheless, you pull down pretty forcefully on the strap so as to reinsert your leg back into the hip. And of course, that's kind of a figure of speech. You're not actually reinserting your leg, but you are connecting the head of your femur bone a little deeper into the groove of your hip socket, your acetabulum. And by making the connection a little bit more complete like that, and the word for that that is typically used by anatomists is congruent, joint congruency, by making the two interfacing surfaces of a joint more congruent, which means to have more surface area in contact with one another. That speaks to the stability of a joint. So a joint is the most stable where both of its sides, or all of its sides, have the most amount of contact with each other. Bring your leg back to center, switch hands to now your left hand. Take your right hand, place it on the right thigh, and before you take your left leg to the left, turn your left leg. And turning means toes and knee face off to the left, and then slowly begin to lower the knee. Nice and easy, nice and easy. And as soon as you detect your right hip or glute coming up, prop your elbow up on the floor, or like you did before on the bolster. You can also prop it up on the block. Although, of course, a bolster or blanket will feel nicer. Once you get your elbow propped, re-engage your left biceps and pull your leg back into the hip. And so this, in a way, is a version of triangle pose. A lot of very similar properties and details when we move our leg out to the side, which is abduction of the leg, requires also external rotation. And so while you're keeping your leg abducted to the side, make sure you're consistently trying to turn your toes and kneecap down towards the floor. One or two more breaths, actually. Inhale, bring your leg back to center. Perfect. Bend your knee. Take the belt off. Put the belt off to the side. Bend both knees. Roll over to your side. And let's come on up. And just to start sitting in Vajrasana. And Vajrasana just means, if you see from the back, you're sitting simply on the heels. If your knees can't bend as much, what you can do is you can put a blanket between the heels and the sit bones. And if your knees don't want to bend too much at all, you can use a bolster or several blankets so you have this kind of support system going up. And see how my knees don't have to flex as much, and yet I still have the same position. Okay. And then if you're sitting on the bolster, you have two blocks, right? Keep one block on each side of you, but only if you're sitting on a bolster. Okay. Now, if you look to the right, in line with your right hip on that part of the mat, you're going to place your right hand down. Make sure your fingers are facing away from you. Lift your left arm up, and then slowly start to do a little fingertip walk of your right hand to the right, and keep walking that hand over, really as far as you need to, until you notice your left sit bone significantly start to remove itself from the left heel. As soon as that happens, I'm going to have you plant your right hand down, keep your top palm facing to the right, and then start to bend your top arm overhead. And where you actually want to end up is to keep the line of your left arm congruent with the whole curved line of the left side of the body. The way that you press away from the mat with your right hand will set your left sit bone back onto the heel. And so in a way, we're trying to get that to happen. We're trying to replace the weight to the left heel that's been lost by tilting the body sideways. Now, as long as you can keep the weight pressure in the left sit bone and the left heel together, you can actually start to also bend your right elbow. And as you bend your right elbow, it might allow your forearm to come completely to the floor, where again, you're still pressing away with your right arm so as to keep the pressure of the left sitting bone on the heel, but then arch your top arm a little bit further overhead. And so eventually we can start to aim ourselves to a point where we can do such a full deep side bend that we can get the top hand to come down to the bottom hand. But of course, don't push it on that because this is, after all, a therapeutic practice. Now, to say this, for therapeutic practice, there's a specific intensity level that we want to make sure not to transgress, because it's going to tend to overstress the tissues more than what we might need. And so, in a scale of 1 to 10 of intensity, where the number 10 is equivalent to like a medical emergency pain, the intensity we want to aim for is about a 6. So, about 60% of your full capacity of that stretch. So, breathing here into the left side of the body as you inhale, really try to saturate your left lungs. The fact is that our lungs are not like a sheet of paper where there's only a front and a back. And yet, the way that we live most of our lives, even if we do think of breathing, we rarely think of filling up the whole side of the lungs. But your lungs are a three-dimensional organ. And the side of the lungs, which are between your left arm and the left ribs, that part deserves just as much attention, just as much saturation as any other part of the lungs. Yet we seldom do these kind of side bends for protracted periods of time and allow that kind of oxygenation to occur. So when you do a side bend, what you're actually allowing to happen is more saturation, more sequestering of oxygen to the left lungs, and by that, on that same note, more expulsion of carbon dioxide, so more of a detox of waste matter. Inhale, come right back up to center, walk your hands in, and then with your left hand to the left, start to walk your left hand over to the left until the right sit bone is starting to come up. If you're sitting on a bolster, you can't reach your hand to the floor, put your hand on the block, and then you can progressively move or slide your block away from you since it's too far to get to the floor. Now, with the right arm overhead, keep your top right palm facing the left. And when you get to a point where the right sit bone starts to disconnect from the heel, press away with your left arm, reset the right sit bone to the heel, and start to bend your left elbow. If your left elbow does come to the ground, continuously still keep pushing with your left arm. Push away from the body so that the right sit bone stays tacked down. And then start to bend your right arm overhead, start to offer up a little bit more space to now the curve on the right side. And of course, as soon as we do a second side to any of these asymmetrical poses, the first criteria or the first observation should be, how is it different? How does it compare to the previous side? So is your breathing more or less effortful on this side? Does your overall sense of awareness, your kinesthetic awareness, your body awareness, does that feel more enriched in this side bend? Do you feel more or less restless? All these things are very important to take into account when we're resetting the alignment of the body, when we're actually attempting to diagnose the setting of the body, the circumstance of our tissues. And so for these last two breaths, don't try to just keep your arm overhead kind of half active, but if you're going to extend your arm overhead like this, where your hand goes, your shoulders have to go. So let your right shoulder blades start to ascend up towards the right ear. And last breath out. Inhale, slowly come on up. Walk your left hand back. Perfect. So now, come forward on all fours. Make sure that your hands are right below the shoulders, the wrists especially, and your knees are right below the hips. So I want to do a couple of spinal rolls. So what that looks like is I'm going to lean forward so my hips are going further past my knees and my shoulders going further past my wrists. And it allows me to round more at the top of the spine. You can see my lower back is more flat, but my upper back has a little bit more of a hump. And then we're going to rock backwards. When you get to center, that's going to allow you to create an arch with the middle part of your spine. So you're going to push that to the ceiling, and then from there we're going to rock back, kind of towards child's pose, but not too far, so you're not going to sit all the way back on the heels, which now allows you to keep your upper back more straight and allows you to curve more in the lower back. So the footnote here, of course, is during any one of these rockings, if you feel your low back pain, if that's something you've been dealing with, if you feel that become exacerbated, back out, back up on the degree of force you're exerting of the bend. So start with a flat spine, and then on your exhale, first push your arms into the floor like you're trying to drive your hands through the ground, which then allows you to push your upper back towards the ceiling. But you're not going to rock forward, you're just going to stay centered over the shoulders and knees respectively, and just try to create a curve with the middle back. So where's the middle back exactly? Think of where the lowest ribs are on the front of the torso. Adjacent to that is pretty much your middle back. So I want you to try to press that part of your middle back up as high as you can. So you're just really exploring how much closer you can get those vertebrae of your spine to the ceiling. Okay, now take it slow. You're going to rock forward. So this is where the shoulders go past the wrists and the hips go past the knees forward. And as you rock forward like this, you'll notice the low back curve really straighten out, and you can start to capitalize on curving your upper back. And what's helpful there is if you tuck your chin in, because neck flexion is still a part of spinal flexion, it helps recruit a more spinal flexor technique. So if you tuck your chin and still driving your arms into the floor, push the upper back towards the sky. So you went from the middle back to the upper back. Hold out for a couple of breaths. Remember, your upper thoracic spine is much more stiff than your lower thoracic spine, so don't look for terribly big results. Okay, and then slowly we're going to rock back through the middle and go in the other direction where your shoulders go back away from the hands and your hips go back away from the knees. And when you get there, round the lower back. And what you'll feel is this ability to pull your butt in. You know, the instruction we've often heard for years in yoga classes are tuck the tail. So don't think of it as tucking the tail. Think of it as really tucking your pelvis, or like tucking your butt in as opposed to sticking your butt out. And you can do quite a bit of that if you don't feel any discomfort or any pain arising in the low back. And so now it's not so much that you need any effort from your arms. All the effort is really coming together in the lower end of your abdominal wall, your transversus abdominis muscle. And so find how you can pull your pubic bone into the navel, right? You're pointing your tailbone, your sitting bones towards the ground. Those are the definitive characteristics of a posterior tilt. Okay, and then come back to center. All right, from here, lift your knees, press back to downward dog. And in this downward dog, you can kind of move your heels if you like side to side, move your hips around a little bit. But then relax your face in order to relax the neck. Close your eyes. And so remembering what you just went through in the quadruped position, I want to try to repeat that in downward dog. So instead of staying quadruped, we're going to go from downward dog to high plank. And so if you want to take a look, here's what it's going to look like. You're going to start with an inhale. You're going to curl your lower back first. So again, that's all that posterior tilt. So you're creating a hump right here. And then you're going to take that rounding and you're going to try to shift it to the middle back. And when you do that, you're going to start to come halfway towards high plank. So you're neither in high plank at this point, nor are you in downward dog. You're kind of halfway in between, and that allows you to hit the halfway point of your spine. And then from there, as you shift your body more towards high plank, I want you to center that hump in your spine, that round in your spine, more in the upper back. So we'll do that 3 times, right? So once you get into downward dog, close your eyes.
Inhale, lift the heels, round your low back, tuck the pelvis in, pull your booty bone towards the belly, and then shift forward towards halfway between plank and dog. Get the rounding in your middle back, and then keep shifting forward into high plank and just centralize the rounding in your upper back. Take an extra inhale here, and as you exhale, take the rounding from the upper back, transfer to the middle back, and then transfer that rounding finally to your low back, and then let it all go when you're back in your full dog pose. One extra breath in dog pose. Inhale, lift the heels, round the low back. Round the mid back. And then round the upper back as you get in a high plank. Take an inhale on high plank. Exhale, round from the upper back to the middle back to the lower back. And dog pose. Relax the head. One free breath. Exhale everything. Last one. Inhale. Round the low back to the middle. From the middle to the upper thoracic. Stay for an extra inhale in the upper thoracic, high plank. And exhale, take that upper thoracic rounding to the middle back. And then to the lower back. And then downward dog. Relax your neck, drop the head. And then come down to your knees. Child's pose for a couple breaths. Keep your knees far enough apart so that you can let your forehead rest on the mat. Keep your arms out in front of you. Do try to keep the elbows lifted. And if that prevents the weight of your head resting comfortably on the forehead, of course you can bend the elbows at that point. Okay, so we're going to add a little side bend to this again. Lift your torso just enough so you can start to walk your hands over to the left to create a side bend. So at the very deepest, you're going to have your sternum right over the left thigh. You're going to bring your head back down. Now, of course, if your torso to leg length ratio is as short as mine, you can pull in a block, rest your forehead on the block, but still keep your elbows straight and stay in this position. Okay, so you should feel some disparity between the weight on the left heel and the weight on the right heel from your sitting bones. So where you're going to go next is you're going to place your right hand on top of the left hand. Keep your left fingers in your palm open, but really clasp the fingers of your right hand tightly around the left hand. And you're going to start pushing with the left arm only. All you're doing with the right arm is you're hanging on. And so what you're going to do is you push away with your left arm is a very similar action as you do in downward dog when you're pushing your torso off the floor. But I want you to try to use that to connect your sitting bone, right sitting bone, to the right heel a little bit deeper, even if it doesn't come back on it as firmly as it is on the left. It's the action that you're employing in that direction that really matters most. So it's not oftentimes the fact that we can ever reach a final position that matters in yoga. It's the organizing actions that will eventually bring about the final position. Those are the ones that render the benefits. Walk your hands back to center. And then walk your hands, continue walking them to the right until your torso is over the right thigh. Still try to keep your hands far out in front of you, away from the body. If you had a block underneath your forehead before, place one under your forehead here. And you're going to switch. This side is going to be the left hand on top of the right. Keep the right fingers and palm open and just press away with your right arm. Right? Exact same kind of technique as what you do in downward dog. You're just pressing the floor away from you. And use that to settle or aim your left sit bone to your left heel a little bit more concretely. Relax the jaw, relax the mouth. Let's take 3 more breaths. And then slowly take your left hand off the right. Walk your hands back to center. Come back forward on all fours. Step your right foot forward between the hands. Keep your left knee on the ground. So our first lunge that we set up is going to be a template for every other lunge of our yoga. And what I want to say with that is you got to keep your right foot exactly on the same track as where your right hip is. And you got to keep your left leg exactly on the same track as where your left hip is. And because the hips are not on a straight line, neither should our feet or legs be in lunging positions. Okay? So then you're going to lift your torso up. And let's see. Let's add a little element of some shoulder flexibility to this. So you're going to take your arms behind you and see if you can hold your opposite elbows. If it's too far to hold the opposite elbows, hold somewhere close to the elbows. Otherwise, if you want to go a little bit further, you can start to reach your hands towards reverse prayer on your back. But what I want you to find is a little bit more rigidity in the torso and not just succumb to the flexibility tendencies. So when you have your arms against your back ribs like this, there's going to be a tendency for the torso to want to kind of roll over them into a back bend. But I want you to press your back ribs against your arms with the same amount of pressure that the arms are pressing against the ribs with the first place. And so you use that by employing your core very accurately. This builds a refinement of using the abs. So it's not just sheer power we're building dexterity into the core. And then take your arms out, hands on the mat, step your right leg back, take your left leg forward. And again, back to your low lunge. Lift your torso up. Generally, you want to make sure that the front heel stays below the knee, the right knee stays below the right hip, and we're going to bring the arms right back. So this time, if you had your elbows before, try to hold it differently so the opposite hand is cupping the opposite elbow. So basically, if it feels unfamiliar, then you're on the right track. Or again, set yourself up in a reverse prayer position, but feel how much pressure your forearms are putting against your ribs, and respond in kind with the ribs. Relax the jaw, and close your eyes if you haven't yet. I want you to get really just used to the feeling of a lunge. Because oftentimes we recruit our visual system so quickly into any posture that we don't even notice how dependent on it we are. But as soon as you're kept away from relying on the visual system, you are confronted with every other sensation that is necessary to make this pose happen, which is actually the more relevant demands of the posture, whereas vision is more abstract. You know, just looking at ourselves in a lunge does nothing to really help us feel the nuance of what makes that lunge possible. And then take your hands out, bring your hands back down, switch sides again, right foot forward, left knee down. Now with your hands on the mat, look at your left leg as you lift the knee. Right, so that's easy enough. So we're gonna inhale, bend the back knee, exhale, straighten it. So 5 times. Inhale, knee bends. Exhale, knee straightens. Inhale, bend. Exhale, straighten. Make sure that when you straighten your left knee, you straighten into the same quality that you did when we were laying down in the beginning in Supta Padangusthasana. Inhale, knee bends. Exhale, knee straightens. And last 2, if you haven't yet, close your eyes. Inhale, bend the knee. Exhale, straighten. Keep the front toes lifted. Last one, inhale. Exhale. Good. And then when you inhale, bring your left knee down. Next time, let's add another twist to the picture. Keep your left hand on the floor, wrist below the shoulder, right hand on your right knee. First, you just press with both arms. Start to turn your chin over the right shoulder.
Now, it depends on how therapeutic you want your experience to be tonight. Don't move your hands. If you want it to be more gentle, keep your hands as they are. Now, if you want to start to elevate the demands and the dynamism of the practice, next step could be just lifting your right arm up. And if that feels okay, but you could still use a little bit more action, keep your right arm up and add the lift of your left knee. Make sure that either way you're pressing down firmly with the left arm. It really is the left arm that's going to dictate the power of this twist. And if you're lifting the back knee up, make sure that with the lift of the back knee, you're also lifting the left side of the pelvis. And what that means is you can't lift the entire pelvis because that starts to straighten your front knee. Keep the front knee bend as is, but just keep trying to elevate your back leg, which is going to turn your pelvis opposite to the direction that you're turning your torso. Inhale, bring the right arm down, left knee down. Switch sides, left leg forward. With your hands on the mat, look at your right leg. Inhale, exhale, straighten the knee. Inhale, exhale. Re-straighten the knee. Make sure the quality of that straightness is full intact. 3 more. Inhale, close the eyes. Exhale, straighten. Inhale. Exhale, slow. Consistent, considerate. Last one. Inhale. Exhale. And then inhale, bring the knee down. Keep your right hand and wrist below the shoulder, left hand on your left thigh. Turn your head over the left shoulder. Look back behind you. So as before, you can add one more notch to the challenge by lifting the left arm up. And if you're going further still, lift your right knee up. And once both are lifted, keep pressing your right arm into the floor, and if neither are lifted, still keep driving your right arm into the ground. One more deep breath in. Last exhale. Inhale, left arm comes down, left leg comes down. Step your right foot forward again. This time, keep both arms on the inside of your right leg. And then move your left knee back as far as you can. So see if you can move your left knee further and further from the front heel. And then turn your right toes and your right thigh to about a 1 o'clock position. With your right hand, your right thigh, your left hand on the ground, resume the twisting you were in before. Turn your head over your right shoulder. The neck is oftentimes overlooked when we're instructed to twist deeper because we don't think usually of the neck as a part of the spine, and yet it is. And so the more of our spine that gets to participate in any movement, the more of that occurs, the better the entire part of the movement, the entire movement of the spine has. And so we improve our rotation in the thoracic spine if we improve our rotation in the cervical spine, which is the neck. So once you get your full twist happening, you're going to add one thing. You're going to bend your back knee and lift the foot. And without undoing the twist, because this is oftentimes what happens, people try to reach back and grab their foot, but because the quadriceps and the psoas muscles get so tight, people usually start turning their chest towards the ground. And so if I'm facing the ground, my right arm is further from my left foot than if I'm turned. So you want to stay in your rotation when you lift your foot and grab it, right? And we just stay in this position right now. Keep your left butt engaged as much as you can. The purpose of engaging the left glute falls back on the description I was giving earlier about the reciprocal inhibition properties of the body. So because your glutes are antagonists to the psoas, engagement of your glutes gets inhibition in your psoas muscles. Last breath out. Inhale, untwist. Right hand down, right leg back, left foot forward. Keeping both arms on the inside of the front leg. Make sure your left toes and thigh are on the same linear track. So to the left at about 10 or 11 o'clock. With your left hand on your left thigh, resume the twisting in this direction. And it's okay if you let your right side of the pelvis, your right hips, kind of sag a little bit closer to the floor. So here we go. Keep this amount of twists in the body. Slowly bend the back knee, lift the foot, and then reach back and grab it from the outside. That means your elbow, the crook of your elbow, your bicep is facing the same direction as your chest is. You can, of course, adjust your right hand more forward if you feel a lot of tension in the shoulder. So if your hand is further away from the body, you don't have to use as much muscular effort to keep that together. So you're just holding the foot while continuously letting the right side of the pelvis drop closer to the mat. And it's okay if the inner edge of your front foot rolls off the ground. Just make sure your toes are lifted. Make sure your foot is active. And even if it's not flat on the mat, the fact that it's active keeps your knees and your hip alignment more responsible. And then release the foot. Bring the left arm down. And that then brings us to the end of our practice. And to finish things off on a nice high note, you're going to lay down on your back with your knees bent. And we've done this before in finishing the class this way. We're going to do some dynamic bridges and go right into the rest. So where you're going to start is lifting your pelvis up for bridge, and then adding to that the lift of your arms overhead. And make sure that you have full straight elbows and you can actually press your arms down. Now, the higher you lift your pelvis up, the more contact you'll be able to make with your arms on the floor. So lift your pelvis up rather high, press your arms down. Okay, you're going to keep your arms in this position. And then as you exhale, you're just going to keep your arms there, but you're going to try to bring your torso back to the mat. And what you'll notice is as your butt and torso and pelvis comes closer to the floor, it gets more and more difficult to keep your arms in that same heavy position overhead. And what we want to work towards eventually is when you return your hips back down to the mat, to get the entire line of your spine flush against the floor. So let's try it. Inhale, pelvis up, press your arms down, and now exhale as you bring your pelvis down. Persist in the pressure of your arms against the mat. When your exhale is ended, inhale, start the next one. As you lift your pelvis, reasserting the pressure of your arms against the floor, and keep the pressure of the arms asserted as you exhale. Bring your pelvis back down. In the last two here, close your eyes. And again, back to feeling. Feeling is what saves. Feeling the body is knowing the body. To be aware of the body is to become in more control of it, so that we're not slaves to our circumstance, our physical circumstance. We can be the masters of the body and the masters of our experience. And on the last exhale that you bring your pelvis down on, keep your arms overhead like that for 5 full breaths in the static position. If it feels awkward on the shoulders, turn your arms so that the palms are facing each other to keep your hands on the thumb side of the edge. One more deep breath in. Exhale, and then relax the arms. Bring your arms back down. If you were using a bolster before, You could just slip that bolster underneath your knees here, and then use a blanket to pad your head. Use another blanket to cover your eyes, or use a belt to cover your eyes. If you're going to use blankets to supplement for a bolster, that's again very, very important. This is actually a very good psoas relaxing posture, even though it's still in flexion. It's very passive, gentle flexion. Just make sure that if you're going to put something underneath your knees, because it's not like you have to do this type of shavasana, but if you do have a bolster underneath your knees, anything underneath your knees, do one of these things where you lift each foot at a time so that you can really allow the weight of your leg to be fully supported against the bolster. It's not just your feet being stuck against the mat that is keeping the legs bent. And then arms out to the sides. Retire from facial expressions, retiring from any other demands on the body. The only thing I would suggest before retiring from everything but observation is line yourself up so that there's symmetry of how your weight is distributed. Making sure that the right arm has the very same way of contacting the floor as the left arm. The right heel the same as the left heel. And so equally for the pelvis and hips, the torso, and even the head. That was a good practice. I wish you a great rest. And make sure that you stay and give yourself plenty of time to come to a state where, or a state that you feel is going to leave you in a better place than when you arrived on the practice on the mat. And if you have the time for it, don't move until you feel that state rise up and coalesce. Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned for more classes to come. Please send any questions, comments. Thank you. Namaste.